We go on now to our next debate, which is entitled Different People Make a Difference. We all know, don't we, about the importance of diversity within the force, within the service, and we've had a number of discussions here about the need to treat as equals people from different ethnic backgrounds, people of different gender, or perhaps with different sexual orientations. But what about people who are just different, people who think and act differently to most others? Does the force, its structure and its practices actually give them the leeway they arguably deserve? Well, the Leadership Review made 10 recommendations about how things might change in the future. Is it working, and what more could be done? We have 3 speakers for you this morning, after which, as always, there'll be questions. We have Andy Woodfield, who's lead partner at PricewaterhouseCoopers, Giselle Lockett, who specialises in professional development and integrity at the College of Policing, and Victor Olisa, who is a chief superintendent with the Met. I'd like you all to come up and join us on the platform. Give them a round of applause, please. Thank you. Andy's going to kick us off, and then he'll hand over now to Giselle and to Victor. So, Andy, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here under the bright lights. My name is Andy Woodfield. I'm a partner at PwC. I wanted to give you a perspective of leadership beyond the police service, so in the private sector, and how we are dealing with this challenge of leadership and valuing and respecting difference. For me, leadership really fundamentally, I think, is about leading people. So if you don't have any people, you're not really a leader. If you want to lead people, for me, the most important thing is that you are unlocking their potential. Now, we have a lot of conversations internally within PwC and with our clients about why would you want to pay people to come to work every day not to be the best that they can be? So why would you do that? So why would you pay people to come to work to be average? And yet, for years, we have really done that. And we've done that because what we've done is we've told people what's wrong with them constantly. So we hire geniuses, hire, inspiring young people, and then we tell them how they need to be. And then we try to fit them into little boxes that we call roles and grades. And we try to make them work in those roles and grades, forget who they are as human beings, and if they could stick a smile on their face, that would be quite helpful. But in effect, we spend our entire lives, and certainly I've spent a lot of my life, I should be careful what language I use, being told what I'm not good at. And constantly being told what I'm not good at. So in mid-year and annual performance reviews, all this stuff is great, Andy, but look, this is what you need to work on. This is what's wrong with you. This is what you need to do better, differently, in order for you to fit into this organization and be successful. So my attention as a human being is on what's wrong with me, which is really, really deeply unhelpful. So what I'm doing by putting my attention on what's wrong with me, and the organization putting its attention on what's wrong with its people, is that we're encouraging our people to work on their weaknesses. So we're encouraging people, in effect, to be average. And what that does is it minimizes the potential of our workforces. It's really deeply unhelpful. Now, I understand that when you're in an event-driven scenario, you have to come together with a very defined structure and make stuff happen in that event. But when you're outside of an event, you want to inspire people, and you want those people to give the maximum that they can give to really unleash their full potential. So as a leader, if I want to unleash potential, I have to respect and value difference. I have to respect that every one of us as human beings is a different person. We are unique as human beings. We aren't our grade, we aren't our role. We're not the history of the organization. We are human beings. We have a unique mixture of skills and talents and experiences. So unless we engage with that uniqueness and bring that uniqueness out, we don't maximize potential. Now, when you do engage with the unique talents of individuals as human beings, what you do is you create an environment where people are comfortable to be themselves. and be themselves at work. Now, what that does is something pretty amazing. That means that you get their full potential, you get them to be present. They're not pretending to be good at their job. They're not acting like a great police officer. They're not acting like a great consultant or a partner at PwC. They are being themselves. And we know from research that when people are being themselves, they perform better. So at PwC, we aren't doing diversity and leadership because we're really nice people. I mean, we are nice people, obviously. I haven't met anyone who's fundamentally evil yet, although I have some questions over some individuals I work with. And I'm sure the same is true in this room. We're good people, and we're trying to help bring the potential of everyone else up together so that we unleash the true potential of our workforce. And this is the advice that we give to our clients, that it's easier to deal with everyone as the same, in the same way, but it's much more powerful to unleash the individual potential and then the whole potential of the organization. So the great thing about this is that you're not doing this because it's something nice to do, because you're kind and lovely people. You're doing it to maximize the potential of your workforce. You're doing it because you want the people that you pay to come to work every day to be the absolute best that they can be. The positive side effect of that is that you do end up respecting and valuing the difference of those people from a diverse perspective. So we know that when you look at what's right with human beings, rather than obsessing with what's wrong with them, when you look at what's right, you tend to suppress your bias. So you tend to suppress your unconscious bias. So I'm sure many of you heard about unconscious bias. It's the natural biases that we all have to basically connect with people like us. So when people are not like us, we tend not to connect as well with those people. And that's an unconscious bias. I should declare an unconscious bias. So I grew up in a little village in Dorset. There was a real posh school there, full of very wealthy people. I wasn't one of those. Our school was a really rubbish comprehensive school, and we always got in fights with the posh kids. So I still have a bias when I hear someone with a really posh accent. It's not that I want to hit them or anything, because I'm not a bad person, honestly. This is a really bad audience to tell this story to. But I have that bias, that I play this story in my head about the people with a posh accent. So I know that I need to work on that. I need to be conscious of that. And what we know is that if I was to look at that person with a posh voice and seek for what they are naturally good at, to look for what's right with them, my bias goes away, because I'm not looking for what's wrong with them. Now, in our performance review processes, typically what our focus is looking for what's wrong with people, so that we can give them what we call development points. When you tell someone that you want to give them some feedback or development points, I don't know if this is familiar to you, but what happens is it engages the primitive part of our brains. And what tends to happen in the primitive brain is that you tend to run away, try to escape, or defend yourself. So whenever you tell someone you want to give them feedback, when I hear that word feedback, which is the language we use, I feel the back of my brain already, and I'm already thinking where the exits are. People will defend themselves and run away from that feedback. Whereas when you tell someone, look, do you know what? The last time I saw you at your best, you were doing this. Actually, it was amazing. It was last Tuesday, and these were the people that were there. This is the situation. This is what you did, and this was the impact of what you did. That actually engages the frontal cortex of my brain, and I'm much more able to take that on board, because it's positive, it's real, it's situational, it's reference to a date and a time, and I know the impact that I had. I can also then really position within that feedback the things that I might do better. So how do I become more amazing more often? Well, actually, there's a bunch of stuff I might do, which is me sticking my foot in my mouth. Things that are not helpful, that get in the way of me being the best that I can be. So we try to encourage our people to look for stories of when they were at their best, and to share feedback in the language of stories. So what I mean by that is that I would tell people, this is when I saw you at your best. This is when it was last Tuesday, this is what happened, these were the people that were there, this is what you did, this is the impact. So we look for stories of when people were at their best, and then we help people to understand what could they do differently to get to their best more often, more consistently. So focusing on what's right with people, focusing on people's strengths, doesn't mean that you ignore their development. It doesn't mean that you ignore their development. It doesn't mean that you ignore their weaknesses. What it does mean is that you focus on their natural strengths, and when they're at their best, you have those conversations. You bring them into the frontal cortex of their brain where they can do something with it. Once that frontal cortex of the brain is warmed up, you can then give them the development points, and they can be at their best more often, more consistently. Now, I know that there are things that I have to do as part of my job that I'm never going to be brilliant at. I hate spreadsheets and budgets and details like that. Some of you may love those. And the reality is there's people that sit near me that love that shit. So why don't they do it? And the reality is that they're being told they need to do more stuff that I'm naturally good at. Their life is miserable because they're trying to do the stuff that I'm naturally good at. And everyone wants to make my life a misery by doing the stuff that they're naturally good at. Why do we do this to our people? It's a crime. We should allow people to operate in their areas of core strength, to be the best they can be, and to mobilize people based on their natural strengths. And again, I would say that mobilizing people based on their strengths, focusing on what's naturally right with people, doesn't mean you ignore their weaknesses. But you have to find a way to manage those weaknesses, maybe by placing other people in that team to compensate for those weaknesses, or maybe just helping that individual find new ways of working with some of those weaknesses. But having them waste their life trying to be good at those weaknesses is making them average, and is making the entire workforce average, and is encouraging everybody to come to work every day and be paid to come to work every day to be average, which we cannot afford. You guys can't afford that. Business can't afford it. We have to maximize the potential of the people that we've got in our organizations, especially, and I know this you'll relate to this, especially when you're reducing the number of people that you have. Often you lose people that you wish you kept, and often you've got people that you wish you'd lost. So, certainly I've had that experience. You don't always lose the people you'd like to lose. So you've got whatever you've got. So the only choice is to maximize what you've got. So for me, leadership really is about maximizing the potential of your workforce. Unfortunately, that means you have to get to know everyone. It's much easier not to bother. It's much easier to consider people as grades and roles, but it doesn't really help. So as a leader, you kind of have to be bothered. If you're not bothered, you probably want to find something else to do. So you do have to be bothered. You have to be bothered to try and help them achieve their potential. And the one thing I would say to you, if you don't remember anything else this strange guy came to talk to you about, one thing I would encourage you to do is to always tell people when you saw them at their best, and be clear on the situation. So when was it? What was the day? Who was there? What did they do? What was the result of what they did that you felt was really them at their best? Now, if you do that, you're entitled also to ask those around you when they saw you at your best. And I would start to really bring that on. So ask, when people start to give you feedback, saying, you know what, you need to really sort out your annual budgets, or you need to sort out your deployment, your workforce deployment issues. Ask them in your feedback sessions, actually, do you know what would be really helpful for me is if you could tell me, when was the last time you saw me at my best? What was the day? Who was there? What did I do? What was the impact of what I did? And the more you, as an organization, start to really share those stories, the more you'll deploy people based on natural strength, the happier those individuals will be, the more effective they will be as individuals, the more effective you will deploy teams of individuals to play to their strengths, and you will eventually unleash the full potential of that workforce that you're working with. Or the alternative is just continue to get people to be average, encourage them to have miserable lives, to be unhealthy, to retire in the hope of doing something really interesting, and probably die straight after retirement. So those are your options. So I don't know which one you fancy, but I kind of fancy having my life today and being happy. So I will leave that with you. That's the one thing if you remember from what I said is tell people when you saw them at their best, be specific, ask people when they saw you at your best. Thank you very much. So I'm going to
Yes, Giselle.
hand over to Giselle.
Now, I don't want to die unhappy, and I don't want to be unhappy in my work or my private life, and I won't ask you to rate my accent, so tell me later. What I want to ask first of all, did anybody hear Radio 4 this morning where there was a bit of a debate about whether you ask school children to raise their hand in the class? Great. Well, I'm going to ask you to raise your hand. Raise your hand if you think you're different. And if you're not quite comfortable, just think about if you think you're different. Thank you. When I asked you that, I think automatically, Andy's given us an introduction to the brain, and we know the brain works very, very quickly. Some of you, I guess, would have thought, well, different from what? Well, of course I'm different. We're all different. But I think some of you would define, and some of us define ourselves and others by age. I'm not quite ready to retire yet. Disability, or I would rather say ability. Gender reassignment, marriage and civil partnership, pregnancy and maternity, race, religion or belief, sex, sexual orientation, or perhaps something else. Now, those of you in the audience who recognise those will know that those 9 characteristics come from the Equality Act. And the Equality Act is extremely important, but I want to try and take us on a bit of a sort of different discussion and a bit of a different debate. Sometimes we think or recognise our difference from a visual perspective, and that's often when I talk to people, that's the thing that they notice. Most of us are quite visual and we'll spot the difference, but actually we make a lot of assumptions, and I couldn't resist this sea lion in the middle of all these penguins. I think he looks charming, but he does look a bit out of place. But actually I think if all of us were honest, most of us would say, actually, if somebody said describe somebody or are they different, we'll pick up a visual characteristic. However, when we all might look the same, each and every one of us is still different. So I think that really resonates with what Andy was saying, that every single one of us, we might come from the same part of the country, we might be the same age, we might have the same complexion, might be male or female, but actually every single one of us is different in our own right. What I think we all have in common, and when I've been speaking to people, and particularly when we were doing the leadership review, which was a key part of my work when I joined the organisation in September last year, was when you talk to people, what most people want is they want fairness, honesty, accountability. They want people to be open. They want good leadership. They want to be respected. They want selflessness. So it's not that sort of, I'm going to win at every count. I'm going to win at the expense of other people. And they want integrity. And I guess every single one of you will recognise those as being the themes within the Code of Ethics. And I think the Code of Ethics is a really fundamental piece of work that has been done, and it's a really fundamental ethos that can help us go on this journey of valuing difference. From the leadership review, we found lots, and there's loads of information on the website, but these were some of the things that I pulled up that I thought was particularly pertinent to this session. So when we talk to people about the concept of valuing difference, and this isn't a sort of right or wrong, but I think it's just to try and stimulate this debate. And if you go away thinking, well, actually, maybe I think like that, and maybe I could think differently. When you talk to people about valuing difference, actually most people and most forces did go back to the BME and the gender, sort of the protected characteristics that seem to be the default position. And I understand why that is. But actually what I want to encourage people to do is to think about difference in a different way. So, you know, it's not just about whether they fit a protected characteristic, it's about what's their learning style. How many of you have perhaps done Myers-Briggs? MBTI is part, I guess most of you have done that if you've been on development programs. And the fundamental thing you learn out of that is that people have preferences. There's no right or no wrong, but people have a different style. But the danger is, and I've done this myself, you know, if you're an extroverted character and that's your preference for working, or if you use a thinking style of working, you tend to like people who are like that. But actually one of the things when you think about things like Myers-Briggs is that you have such a diversity and such a raw and rich a pool of talent and different thinking. So, for example, as leaders, I think when we're in meetings and we have people who are quite quiet, often the assumption is that people aren't engaged in the debate, they have nothing to offer. It's really just not true. It's that they would rather reflect, maybe as leaders or chairs of meetings. We think, how could we engage those people in a different way rather than in the traditional way? If people don't speak up, the one with the loudest voice is the one that gets heard. Often the mindset is on initial recruitment and comparative numbers to population. So again, when we talk about difference and we talk about diversity. And I think that's going to be a bit of a challenge for us because we know that some forces are going to be reducing their recruitment, but that's not going to be like it forever and a day. There will be times when forces want to recruit. But it's all very well attracting people who are different, however we describe that, into the organisation. But when we get them in, and I have a background in healthcare, and I saw this happen in healthcare as well, we try and sort of mould them to, and you hear people say, well, will they fit? Well, fit what? So it's not just about getting people in. We need to be thinking about what we do with our people once we've got them into our profession and delivering our services. So we can't put the effort just on bringing people in. We've got to sustain that through. What I've found coming into the College of Policing, there's some fantastic work going on within forces and actually within the college, I think. But it does seem to be a little bit initiative driven. So one of the things I've been doing with the faculty that I lead is trying to look at how we get to non-initiative sort of task and finish, but we have a more sustainable way of building difference within policing for the short, medium and long term. There has been a deference to difference, and I think some of this has come out in the sort of conversations we've had where people have struggled to perhaps fit or excel at their best, as Andy was saying, and it's because, well, they're different. Oh, don't worry about them. That's just because they're different. We'll celebrate the difference. What is it that they can bring to help us as a workforce and as an organisation providing public services? Some of our processes and the people engaged in them make it worse, actually. In healthcare, I had this thing about you get better at doing it worse, and we really can't go down that route. And that's not a criticism. It's just that we end up with these habitual behaviours. We end up with these stereotypes. And we were talking just before the session about how early that happens on in our life. If you think about it, school, I mean, almost from the day that we're sort of born, we're influenced and we're sort of subjected to perhaps making that we're feeling different. We talked about school teams, you know, the sports teams. I'm not going to ask you this, it'd be cruel actually, but you know, when you're selected for a sports team or you're not, how that makes you feel, and you're not the fastest runner, no, but you could be a really good brain of thinking about how you might get the netball team to work together, but actually because you're not the tallest person, you can't get the goals. And so it starts very early on in our life. And I think with the leadership development and the development that we do with our staff, we've got to try and help people unlock some of those habitual ways of doing, thinking, and behaviours. Some of you will recognise this. I'm sure some of you will be far too young to recognise Tommy Cooper. But I saw this and it reminded me that, you know, he had that joke, when I raise my left arm, it hurts. And the doctor said, well, don't do it. And I sort of sometimes feel that we're on a little bit of doing that. We keep sort of doing the same thing and then wondering why we don't get any change. So if we take the doctor's advice, what should we do? So this is me from a sort of faculty, but also a sort of professional in my own right. I think we need to have collectively agree a common language and gain clarity about understanding of what we mean by valuing difference, because I think that would help. You talk to lots of different people, and I don't think there is one right or wrong answer, but I do think it's a debate we should have, and we should be brave enough to have that. We should start building evidence and practice to support the journey of long-term cultural change. So that goes back to my sort of stopping and starting, and I don't really think that does us any favours. Educate, support and challenge leaders, managers and peers and the public. And I had a really interesting conversation with somebody earlier about the sort of, is it a safe environment to have discussions? Is it a safe environment to say things with a worry that you might get slapped down or told that, no, that's not the right thing to say? But actually, unless you say these things, how can we challenge and how can we educate and how can we support people? I think we need to build internal and external legitimacy, and what I find quite interesting is the notion that people think that if you have a quota of staff of a particular protected characteristic to your population, that automatically gives you legitimacy. Personally, I don't buy that, and professionally, I don't buy that. I think it comes back to all the things that we've talked about within the Code of Ethics. What gives you legitimacy is how you behave, your practice, how you treat people. That is what I think really counts. We should recognise a starting point, which isn't all bad, but we should have clarity of vision. And we should be bold and brave enough to recognise our weak spots. Again, I was talking to somebody earlier and we were saying some of the best inventions and some of the best things we have in our life have happened because people have made mistakes. Now, I'm not talking about negligently going and doing harm or doing wrong, but actually we should be brave enough to say, do you know what, we got that wrong, but what did we learn from it and what can we take forward and how can we improve? And again, talking to people through in the leadership review and while I was going about my sort of work in the college, there does appear to be, in some respects, an element of fear. And I thought this summed it up really lovely. We could forget everything and run, or we could face everything and rise. And I think we have, as leaders within policing and within public sector, I think we have a choice, and I think the choice should be the latter. So the college, what are we doing? So it's given us a great opportunity through the leadership review, but also working with colleagues in the faculty, and Manjit's here and John Hubbard are here from the faculty. I think we need to broaden our positive action. At the moment, we've sort of focused quite a lot on BME, and we're doing Stonewall programs, but we need to see how we can apply that to other underrepresented groups. We've got things like a Stonewall program pilot, positive action sessions supporting some of the programs we offer, and there's a big piece of work going on at the moment looking at developing a reverse mentoring scheme, and we can talk to people afterwards about that. And we've also got the unconscious bias events based on some research that we've done, and that's on the 30th of September, I believe. We should build capability within forces to deliver their own positive action activities. And one of the things for me is to what's our role as a college and what's the role as an employer for forces. We should take forward leadership review recommendations, and there are a number in there that I think are a fantastic vehicle for us to develop the valuing difference. We should we are going to work with colleagues to understand our workforce planning, because actually it's no point recruiting loads of people if we don't understand what the continuum is of the workforce going forward, and we need to be thinking about the skills, the behaviours, the attitudes we want in the future. Sharing practice and good knowledge, and we are looking at developing a valuing difference strategy. And finally, this is courtesy of Andy, but I just loved this, and I hope you can see it. People often say within treating people equally that you treat people all the same. I don't think many of us subscribe to that. Actually, we want to be treated appropriately, and hopefully you can see. But I just thought this was a lovely slide and sums it up. Thank you.
Good morning. My presentation is going to be my experience. through the police service, my journey through the police service. So this is the world according to Victor. Unlike the learned presentations you've been given by Andy and Giselle. So my journey goes through Surrey Police, City of London Police, ended up in the Met. Wonderful place. Just let me start by saying, contrary to popular belief, us delicate souls in the Met can do subtlety. We do appreciate the finer things in life. Some of you might say not very often. So let me start this presentation by just sharing with you some classics study. So Elspeth was a spirit of hope. She, along with the other spirits, were trapped in a jar by Zeus and entrusted to the care of the first woman, Pandora. When Pandora opened the vessel of all the spirits escaped except for Elspeth, who alone remained to comfort the British police service. So this is where the problem starts. For those of you who are knowledgeable in the classics, you would have known that that was to actually comfort mankind, but the Met would like to do things differently. Her opposite number was Morris, spirits of hopelessness and doom. So my journey started in the early 80s. And at the time, the police service had just received a significant boost in their pay scale as a result of the Edmund Davis inquiry. So we were going to actually move, I wasn't a police officer then, but I can say we were going to move from a position where police officers were underpaid, which led him to do some unsavory things, to a position where police officers are going to be properly compensated, which should take away some of the dysfunctional behaviour. And some of the things that the police wanted to do then was to change the culture. And one of the ways they wanted to do that was to recruit graduates. So I was a young upstart at university, hadn't thought about the police, but looked at what the police were doing. They were trying to change the culture, and they were looking for graduates. And I hit a double bonus. Not only was I going to be a graduate, but I looked different. So I thought it'd be great to join the police. So I joined the police with the intention and with the hope of the organisation to, through people who were learned, because they've been through university, people who looked differently, clearly did, and people who had a different mindset, would help change the culture of the police service and make it something akin to more public service than what it was perceived to be at the time. A group of dysfunctional people who actually just resorted to force rather than engagement. And I joined, and the expectation was high from the police service. So I was a small number of graduates who joined, but the expectation was that small number will create a revolution. We will transform the way the police service was seen in an instant. And in my case, I'd be visible, so I would add to that transformation. However, the reality was there wasn't a revolution for some people who can remember that far back. It was evolutionary. And why was that? Well, some of the reasons were, well, you can only take a small number. I mean, let's go back to the early 80s. 142,000 cops. You probably actually inject 24. And they were supposed to make that change. It wasn't going to happen. Revolutionary anticipation became evolutionary progression. The culture of the organisation was really strong. You don't pump in loads of money and expect it to change overnight. And it wasn't changing. And there's a socialisation process. Whatever happened, whether it's the 24, whether it's the 30, we had to live within this organisation. We had to live within the culture. We had to survive within it. And that's not too strong a word. So you can't come in and be different and continue being different because the business of the day has to go on. So the revolution was evolutionary. That led to a number of things and actually developed. And I'll just use one example. So throughout the years as we developed, you had staff support associations, the BPA, for example, BAPA in some other places, got together because people who looked different wanted to try and support each other so they can actually use that difference to benefit the organisation. Now, when there's misunderstanding, when you get that association together, because some people might think, why are these particular groups of people getting together? They're already different. They already receive privileged treatment. What is it that they're trying to do? That misunderstanding can lead to anxiety. And that anxiety can lead to a reduction in effectiveness. Individually, some of that difference can be interpreted in a number of strange ways. I like to think I'm a nice person. However, you can get to a position where some people conflate being nice with being weak. We're police officers. We're in the business of policing. One of the authority that we have is to use force, legitimate force, when all else fails. But sometimes you get to a position where you think, oh, he's very nice. He may never use force when he needs to use force. That becomes a negative. There can be a perception of a trade-off. Oh, these people do community, so they can't quite do enforcement. Why don't they all go together? It becomes a pejorative if you can do community. Some of the negatives from this thinking, this misunderstanding, can be you get left out because you don't fit the majority. Slightly out of kilter, you may not be able to do what it is we want you to do. So you miss out on the opportunities you don't get within the group. Actually, there is a flip side to that. There is a positive side. And in my case, some of those positive sides would be you get offered a tasty job, which I did 3 years ago. So one of the things that we do in the Met, in terms of a long legacy, is to actually try and prevent people being in the same place for too long, which might lead to corruption. So every 2 years, at the borough commander level, we'll go through a process where we move borough commanders around. I'd landed in a borough, in a fairly comparatively quiet borough. I set my stall for 3 years, the things we're going to do, the improvements we're going to make. 10 months later, I get a phone call. When that process goes through, the last thing on my mind was I was going to be moving. But I get a phone call from the assistant commissioner. And the conversation goes like this. Vic, are you sitting down? I'm not governor, but I will find a chair and I will sit down. We're going to make you an offer. And for those people who work in the Met, really perverse. The thing that pops into your mind is, I'm an Italian with a horse's head. No. We're going to make you an offer. We're going to post you to Haringey. There's an immediate elation because you think, somebody must have trusted me to give me a responsibility of a bigger borough. And then the reality sinks in, you think, oh yeah, that's going to be a bit of a challenge. So I would like to think that in the consideration about where I was going to be posted, some thought went into my difference. Yeah, I would like to think, to a certain extent, overtly, there was a discussion about, well, Vic is an efficient performing borough commander, but Vic is also black. And there was a need in Haringey for a senior officer, probably, who was black. I don't know. I don't know if that discussion took place, but I'd be surprised if it didn't. Because that would be one occasion where the difference would have been positive and was positive. So let's just stick with me in terms of moving to Haringey. And as you learn 3 years later. And now at the time, it was probably 8 months after one of the biggest public disorder we'd witnessed in a generation. The shooting of Mark Duggan led to riots that spread beyond Tottenham, beyond Haringey, beyond London. And I remember looking, I'm a Mancunian lad, I remember looking at the pictures on the 6th of the television screen, looking at places in Salford where I grew up, moved around, and trying to rationalise why are the people in Salford smashing the shops in the arcade when we're actually in Tottenham. So it spread. So you learn that some of the things that made you difference and made the positive was style of communication. Now, there were conversations I could, and I did have with people in Haringey that my predecessor couldn't have had. And my predecessor, who I have the utmost respect for, and if there is one thing that irks me about the reports of the riots, is the way that she was actually presented. And I don't think Sandra's here today, but she received the award last night, Sandra Luby. She was absolutely exceptional in the 2 years that she was in Haringey. And my interpretation is that she was put in Haringey because she was different and because she had to deal with a different problem in Haringey at the time. But everything that you read about the outcome of the riots, she does not get anywhere near the recognition and the respect that she deserved. Just my little bit to her. But the style of communication was going to be different, had to be different. And I could have some of those conversations because I was a black man. The language also had to be different. There wasn't any point in getting lost in management and legalese. I needed to talk to the people who, and if you go back and look through some of the images, who were there prior to the riot starting, who were there throughout the 2-year period of the inquest and everything else. Influential people in the community. But being nice didn't equate to being weak. We needed to have some conversations that, put in crude terms, wouldn't resort to you being a racist. That's the reality of being different. And there's a level of influence. And as I said before, it doesn't matter the fact that I'm black, the fact that I'm put in Haringey. One thing is fundamental. I'm employed to be a cop. I had to be a cop and had to be a good cop. And that trust comes within and without. So there's other people in here who we worked with in preparing for the inquest, for the subsequent decision and everything else. And those people are actually magnificent in their world of public order. And we worked day in, day out. And I can say without fear of contradiction that if I wasn't good enough as a cop, that trust wouldn't have been there. And the work that we did in the background may not have worked as effectively as it did. So that's the journey through just a small part of my career. And I think having the privilege to lead at that time had a significant cause from that difference. And that difference, as I come into the conference yesterday and today, and as I've lived through some of that snapshot that was shown in the BBC documentary, which I have to say was more than we expected it to do. So just a brief background. When the BBC came along and they negotiated with the force for over a 2-year period, and the Commissioner and the Management Board agreed to let the BBC in to film, and to film anywhere within London, and except for 2 particular places which they couldn't go into because of security and the rest of it. And I remember the crew coming over to Haringey, and it was at the time when it was leading up to the inquest, and we had a 2-hour conversation, and it was great. What do you do? What's the community? What's things like at the moment? And they disappeared. And they disappeared for about 4 months. Never heard from them again. But then it got to a little bit when the inquest was building up, the tension was building up, and there was talk about, we could end up in a position where we may well have another public disturbance. And someone somewhere probably thought, media. We're not only into the business of giving information, we're in the business of entertaining. Were we likely to capture some entertainment? Let's go to Haringey. So they turned out. It could have been completely different. We could have gone the wrong way. It would have made entertainment that we wouldn't have wanted as an organisation, and probably as an institution beyond London, we definitely would not have needed. But that difference, and using that difference, I'd like to think, contributed to what we ended up with. And one of the salient bits from the BBC documentary was not only recognising the work that we did as the Met in a microcosm in Haringey, but acknowledging that. People coming over and actually saying what you did was commendable. I was lucky. Everyone in this room have done things in their career that are commendable. The big difference is moving from that recognition to acknowledgement. Just want to say, but the obvious signs of our difference is not a reason why people are different. There are the nuances that gives us a different way of seeing the world through our journey through the world. But I just want to end with hope. And I just want to hope that the majority of this wonderful social institution that's the police will continue to see the positives of being different and not only recognise that, but acknowledge it. Thank you.
Thank you all very much indeed. Well, as usual, questions please from the floor. My able assistants will be amongst you very shortly. If I can engage you, Victor. Sorry, you haven't done it yet, mate. I was encouraged by what you had to say. It's a very positive story, etc., etc. But do you, in your heart of hearts, having listened to everything you've said there, do you really think that the police service does actually sort of encourage change, lateral thinking, generally speaking? Your story is a good one, a very positive one. Yeah. But generally speaking, does it do that?
In one word, yes. I think it does. I think the complexity and the difficulties come from trying to mainstream that, trying to break away. I mean, I only alluded to the culture, but we all know that elements of the culture is very powerful. You know, the socialization is very powerful. And the criteria by which we judge effectiveness and efficiency, it's well ingrained. You know, and if you're not out there, and I'll speak for me, and I'll speak for the Mets a little bit, but not too much. You know, if you're not out there being roughy-tufty, if you're not out there being macho, if you're not out there doing that action-centered stuff that the culture, the parts of the culture says policing is about, then, you know, you can be seen as being sidelined. So, you know, you're going to do a bit of community engagement, you might end up with the schools, you might end up with neighbourhood. So I think the intention is absolutely right. It's having the nerve to continue doing, you know.
But that's an initiative on your part. And what I'm asking is, does the system encourage that within you? Does the system actually, well, allows you to do it, but does it encourage that within you?
It's a difficult one. I think the system does encourage that. I mean, if you take our policies and if you take our processes and procedures, very, very few of them encourage mundanity and staying the way they are. It has the scope to develop and be innovative, but it's the human interpretation of that. It's the level of safety at an individual level that prevents you doing that. If I could use just an example, so it's the David Duckenfield moment, in the sense of, you know, you're newly promoted into a role, you're given this challenging opportunity, which you ought to embrace, but there comes a stage where we're not individually strong enough to say, I'm not quite ready for that. Because you know what the consequences might be. You may never get another opportunity to actually try and move to that position. I'd
just like to ask any of you, like, I mean, do you actually think that the system, the structure of the service actually encourages your full potential? Do you think you are allowed, under the strictures of the structure, if I can use that phrase, are you allowed to encourage the full potential of your workforce? Or do you find yourself doing what Andy said, in that sort of just really expecting everyone to be the same, everyone to be pretty average? And I'd love to know your thoughts on that. What about you, Giselle? I mean, you've studied this at probably greater detail than anybody in this room. Am I fair in criticising, from what I know, criticising the force, saying that doesn't happen sufficiently? As it probably doesn't happen in most institutions that I work in, and most of us work in wherever we are.
I think it is different in different forces. I think the thing that struck me when we were doing the leadership review is that there appeared to be, it was not the sustainability and the longevity. So a lot of great stuff that we saw happened because of key personalities or because people were brave enough or whatever. And there was a lack of sharing. So I think the system, and when I talk about the system, I think if you think about it, you've got 43 forces, you've got a huge agenda, people every day do the most amazing jobs, but actually what I don't see is the vehicle to enable people to share. And that's not a criticism of the system or the people, but that's where I was saying in my presentation, I think we've got to think about how we go in with a longer term strategy that does open up for people to share what they're doing. It opens up for people to be brave enough to say, actually, do you know what, I don't think that's the right thing that we should be doing. And it opens up an element of, we talk about innovation, but I don't think we've quite grasp what we mean by innovation, and I don't think we've quite grasped by what we mean by continuous improvement.
I was going to ask you, Andy, I mean, what you're advocating is very attractive. Look, I'm good at this bit, but I hate that bit, etc., etc. And in an ideal world, your bosses would say, oh, fine, go ahead. But actually what you're encouraging is sort of internal commercial anarchy, isn't it, really? Because the system would just go to pieces if everyone was granted their wish. I mean, you've got to conform to some degree, or then you've got to stay within certain structures if the thing is going to have any efficiency at all, isn't it?
Yeah, I think, you know, I'm not advocating that you ditch your responsibilities. I think we need to, rather than try to be the same as everyone or act like and become actors of the role, we need to really understand our responsibilities and own them. And then hopefully your natural strengths will form a large part of those natural responsibilities. If there are no natural strengths that you have that relate to your responsibilities, you're probably in the wrong job.
Exactly.
But mostly what you find is that there are a large range of key skills and natural strengths that do form part of your responsibilities in the job. And then there are a whole lot of things that you're kind of rubbish at that you need to manage.
Yeah.
But it's not about ditching responsibility.
Yes, sir. Just introduce yourself, tell us who you are, and ask your question, then we'll go to the back. Yes, sir.
Chris Harden from West Yorkshire Police. It's in answer a bit to John's question about whether people can actually aspire to be as good as they possibly can be, and it links into what Andy was saying about the reducing numbers and reducing workforce within the police service. And we've long had this debate about the omnicompetent police officer, and I think this is the sort of thing we're aspiring to, in inverted commas, is somebody who can do everything, but are they actually really good at anything that they do? And there's the risk that trying to get officers to be able to do every type of work on the front line, that you've got people who are just about competent in most things, but not actually really being really good in something, really good in the things that they should be really good at.
Yeah, fair enough. Point, anyone pick up on that? Giselle?
I think I would agree with that. I think as human beings, we've got to be realistic about human capacity and capability. And so one of the things I think is really great when you have managers, leaders who can absolutely recognise that they've got somebody in their team who's much better at doing something than they are. And it's no shame to be able to say, and it's not abdicating your responsibilities, but it would be great if more leaders could have the courage. That some leaders do this, absolutely, but we're supported in understanding that it's okay. You know, Andy, what do you think about that? That's what you're good at. Could you please support me, help me, give me some advice or whatever? But I think there is I have a military background, so I understand the sort of macho way, and I don't think that's necessarily just for males. I think it's an organisational culture sometimes.
Isn't it fear? I mean, isn't it, boss, if I promote him or her, they'll have my job next week?
I don't necessarily think it's fear. I think sometimes it's the way it is. You know, that's the way it is. That's the way a system works and what have you, so people conform. And it takes a brave person to go against conformity because you're exposing yourself, aren't you? That came out wrong.
Yeah.
But you're highlighting where you might be different. So, but I think there's some really great examples of fantastic leadership at all levels, and I think we need to build on that. I think the danger is we beat ourselves up when actually we should say, right, what do we do really well, and how can we take that forward, and how can we replicate it?
Okay, let's go to the back of the room. We've got one there, and then down there. Right, I've got several there. Oh, lady at the back. Yes. Tell us who you are, please.
Hi, Helen Macmillan from Durham. I just wanted to ask a question around how we keep some energy around our drive to be more diverse and to value difference, when traditionally we've tried to do that through recruitment. So as we all shrink in size and we have less and less opportunities to bring new people into the service and to encourage diversity in that way, how do you see us being able to keep some momentum? It's really important that we do try to change our culture going forward when we've, in effect, we've turned off in many forces that recruitment tap, which has traditionally been the way that we've tried to move forward with race and diversity.
You know, make the most of what you've got, you mean, yeah?
Yes.
Yeah. All right, who wants to pick up on that?
If I may, very quickly, one of the things that I talked about there is that the obvious difference is not the thing that leads to us behaving differently. So just as a practical example, we've talked about this for many, many years, not only in the Met but across the police service, about a skills profile of the people that we've got. You know, what talents do they have? What do they bring? What are they able to contribute? So we don't do that. And if we were to do that, 130,000 as we are now nationally, me confident that we could probably find all the diverse skills and all the abilities that we need.
You mean
within
an
that
actual
group of
file?
people. You know, as individuals, so what skills do individuals bring in and actually have a database? You know,
That's what I mean,
languages,
yeah.
that kind of very basic stuff. So we're having this drive for diversity. We always look externally. Let's bring new people in. Let's have this churn when we've not done the work about the people that we have. What is it that they have within them which could make that difference?
Which is what the lady's saying. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Baz Jabid from West Midlands Police. My question sort of goes to the bits that you've all said today about accepting that the organisation needs to look and feel different. And that's for many reasons, and it's not just about the protected characteristics as you talked about. But certainly in my 22 years of policing, I can't remember a time when we haven't been talking about that. And there's been lots said, but in my view, very little actually achieved. And I have a view that one of the reasons for that is when we look at the higher levels of leadership in any of the institutions, whether it be PCC, Chiefs, the MPIA stroke college or HMI, everyone always says the same thing, which is it's a collective responsibility, which often ends up with no one taking the responsibility. So my question is, accepting all of that, who do you feel, if we want to as an organisation look and feel different, whose responsibility is it?
Good question. Giselle? And Andy, sorry.
Well, that's part of what I was saying in my presentation, that one of the things that we're doing as a college in discussion with others is, well, what is a professional body's responsibility? How does the MPCC fit in with this, with the future workforce? What's an employer's responsibility, but also actually what's our collective responsibility as individuals? And one of the things which my team are looking at is we've got a series of programs, but actually they are the more traditional positive action programs, but maybe we should be looking at some of the stuff that goes in our recruitment, the standards we set, working with HMIC about what they would expect to see forces doing, but also working with forces, so picking up Victor's point. If we're looking ahead and we're not recruiting new people, but what are the skills and the behaviours and the attitudes that we need in the future? And how do we have more of, and I'm going to say it, people sometimes hate it when I say this, what's our talent management process? And how do we look at people in a more multi-dimensional way? So somebody who might be on your switchboard or in your ops room, actually they have many more skills than we would first consider. They do things outside of their working life that brings a multitude of skills. So I think that's what we've got to do, because I agree with you, there's been this collective, well, we're all responsible for it. Yes, but who's going to do which bit?
All right, Andy.
And what we're going to do.
Sorry.
No.
I completely agree, but I would just, I mean, this all, whenever you get into this debate about who and why isn't it moving, the answer usually is it's you. You're responsible for it. All of you, all of us, we're all responsible for this as leaders in whatever dimension of life we exist within. So certainly, if you want to see change, you have to champion that yourself. And then the hope would be that the college and others would put the frameworks around to support you in that. But if you consider yourself to be a leader in this room, it's your responsibility to make it happen, and you can make it happen.
I'm going to pause you there, Andy, because I haven't got much time. I've got a couple of questions left. I'm going to go to Faye first, ladies first, and then this gentleman here.
Faye Tennant, I'm the Vice President of the British Association of Women in Policing. Hello, Giselle. And just wanted to say that all the research and work that has been done tells us that role models and buy-in from the top is absolutely key. I think there's a lot of people in this room that are in that senior management role and will accelerate to the chief officer group. And it is really vital that their buy-in and the support is there. I don't feel, and I don't think a lot of people believe, that there is, when people get to that chief officer level and from the government, that there is enough emphasis on difference. We're being asked to think differently, think our way out of the austerity. The lady over here from Durham talking about no recruitment. We can't rely on new people coming in. We're here now. We've got to deal with it. So what do you think is the way forward for ACPO and government to actually make sure that the difference starts happening now?
What was ACPO? Yeah. Giselle?
Well, one of the things that we are doing within the college is reviewing all of our leadership programs. As most of you, in fact, I'm sure all of you will know, that thing we identified is that we do have a bit of an issue that most people get their leadership development, if you like, at the point of when they're promoted. So we sort of have people within forces doing great jobs. They then get the attention and the investment when they're sergeant above, and that can't be right. We've got to start growing this from the day that people join. It does go back, Faye, to my talent management thing, and it goes back to how I think some of the way we develop leaders is slightly didactic. I personally would like to see much more personal involvement. I'd like to see much more innovative support for thinking innovatively and actually taking those things forward. If somebody's got a great innovation or great idea and they want to try something different, unless it's going to kill somebody, actually let's try and do it, and let's do it in a framework that then people can be supported and they can demonstrate that. So the college needs to review what it does with its own leadership stuff, I think.
This will have to be our last question, I'm afraid, because the clock is beating us. Yes, sir, introduce yourself.
Thank you. Peter Crowcroft from Cheshire Police. Just ask the panel, the challenge you discussed there, how much do you think it's made more challenging because of the 30-year type career? I know things have changed, some will have to do more than that, but the fact that you can't leave the organisation to pick up other differences, come back at any sort of rank. I know we have the career break that you can, but at any rank, particularly difficult, the pension sort of thing. So you're unable to go in and out to develop the skills that you might have to bring some difference back.
Interesting point. Victor, do you want to word on that?
It's a, sorry, it's going to sound glib, I think it's a really difficult one, that. So let me, I think there's some strengths that are built up with the 30-year career. There's some strength in terms of understanding the institution, understanding what the institution's there to do. I think the challenge is we can become glib and actually just take it for granted, so you do it on a day-to-day basis. A very simple example. The very notion of depriving someone of their liberty. And because you serve in the organisation for such a long time, it becomes a routine task. But for somebody who's coming in and moving out again, that is a significant act that any human being can carry out on another one. So I can see that happening, you know, in the terms of moving in, having people in who come in and having short careers, trying to change, you know, the strong elements of the culture. I can also see the long-term longevity of people staying in. The one bit I really do want to make is the sense of you need a critical mass if you're going to do that. You know, so we've got direct entry at the moment, an inspector at superintendent level. And again, I'll speak for the Met. Over the last two processes, we've probably got about 9 people in an organisation of 30,000, and we're expecting them to work miracles in a short space of time. So I don't want us to kid ourselves by short-term career development in your institution, in the organisation is going to change it without having that quantity that could really make a difference.
Okay, I'm going to end it there. Thank you very much indeed. And show your appreciation to the panel. Thank you very much.